She was born into danger, not because of anything she had done, but because of who her parents were. In September of 1533, King Henry VIII finally received the child he had waited years for. But the child was not a son. It was a girl. Her name was Elizabeth, and from the moment she opened her eyes, England became a dangerous place for her to survive. Her father had destroyed marriages, broken with Rome, and changed the fate of an entire kingdom in pursuit of a male heir. Instead, he got another daughter. A disappointment. The celebrations prepared for the birth of a prince were quietly cancelled. Official announcements had to be rewritten. The kingdom expected a future king. Instead, England received Elizabeth Tudor, and Henry VIII never truly forgave her for it. But the real nightmare had not yet begun. When Elizabeth was only 2 years old, her mother, Anne Boleyn, was arrested. The charges were shocking: adultery, treason, incest. Whether the accusations were true hardly mattered. In Henry VIII's England, survival depended entirely on the king's mood. Anne Boleyn was sentenced to death. And on a cold morning in May of 1536, Elizabeth's mother was beheaded inside the Tower of London. The little girl was too young to understand what was happening, but she would spend the rest of her life living in the shadow of that execution. Because after Anne died, Elizabeth became something dangerous, the daughter of a disgraced queen, a child connected to scandal, betrayal, and blood. She was stripped of her royal status, declared illegitimate, a bastard in the eyes of the crown, and in Tudor England, being unwanted by the king could become a death sentence. Most children would not have survived that world. Elizabeth did, because very early in life, she learned how dangerous attention could be. She became quiet, careful, observant. She watched people before speaking. She learned to hide her thoughts behind a calm expression. And over time, she developed the one skill that would keep her alive for decades. She became impossible to read. That skill saved her again and again. She survived her father. She survived the endless religious chaos tearing England apart. And eventually, she survived her sister Mary. That may have been the most dangerous chapter of all, because Queen Mary I had every reason to hate Elizabeth. Elizabeth represented everything Mary blamed for the destruction of her own life. Anne Boleyn had humiliated Mary's mother. Henry VIII had abandoned the Catholic Church for Anne. And now Anne's daughter stood dangerously close to the English throne. Mary could never fully trust her, especially because England itself was becoming divided between Catholics and Protestants. Elizabeth understood this perfectly, so she played a careful game. She attended Catholic Mass. She spoke cautiously. She revealed almost nothing. But silence could not protect her forever. In 1554, a rebellion broke out against Queen Mary, Wyatt's Rebellion, a Protestant uprising fueled by fear, politics, and anger. There was little proof Elizabeth had participated, but suspicion alone was enough. Mary ordered her arrested, and soon Elizabeth was travelling by barge through the freezing waters of the River Thames toward the Tower of London, the same fortress where her mother had died, the same prison where countless enemies of the crown had vanished forever. As Elizabeth approached the Traitor's Gate, rain fell heavily across the stone walls. The guards waited, the gates opened, and according to witnesses, Elizabeth suddenly stopped. She sat down directly on the wet steps, refusing to move, refusing to enter willingly as a traitor. For a moment, nobody knew what to do. The future Queen of England sat in the cold February rain, refusing to surrender her dignity. Eventually, she was forced inside. But the message was clear. Elizabeth Tudor would never break easily. Inside the tower, investigators searched desperately for evidence against her. Letters, witnesses, confessions, anything. But Elizabeth had spent her entire life learning caution. She left almost nothing behind, no proof, no confession, no clear mistake. And so, after months of fear and uncertainty, she survived once again, released, but not truly free. She remained under constant watch, every movement reported, every conversation monitored, every visitor observed. So, Elizabeth waited. She read books, studied languages, practiced diplomacy, and mastered patience, because patience in Tudor England could be more powerful than armies. Then finally, everything changed. On November 17th, 1558, Queen Mary died, and suddenly, the woman who had spent her entire life surviving became Queen of England. Elizabeth was only 25 years old, but she already understood something terrifying about power. Power was never safe. Power invited betrayal, plots, enemies, and fear. Still, when Elizabeth entered London as Queen, the crowds exploded with excitement. People filled the streets, cheering, shouting her name, watching the young Queen ride through the city that had nearly destroyed her. But Elizabeth understood something many rulers never did. Public love could disappear overnight. So she carefully built an image, warm, intelligent, untouchable. She smiled at crowds, spoke gently, remembered names, and slowly transformed herself into something larger than a normal monarch, a symbol, a myth, the Virgin Queen. But behind the image, there was always danger. England remained deeply divided. Catholics viewed Elizabeth as illegitimate. Foreign powers wanted influence over England. And across Europe, powerful men still believed a woman should never rule alone. Many expected Elizabeth to marry quickly, to hand real authority to a husband, to become manageable. Elizabeth refused, again and again. Kings pursued her. Princes negotiated for her hand. Foreign ambassadors pressured her constantly. But Elizabeth understood marriage could destroy the independence she had fought her entire life to protect. So she delayed, stalled, manipulated negotiations, and used the possibility of marriage like a political weapon. She turned uncertainty into power. It was brilliant and dangerous, because while Elizabeth built her image, another threat was growing in the background. Mary, Queen of Scots, a Catholic rival with a strong claim to the English throne. For years, plots formed around Mary. Secret letters, hidden alliances, conspiracies whispered in dark rooms. And at the center of every rumor was the same terrifying possibility: Elizabeth's assassination. For nearly 2 decades, Elizabeth kept Mary imprisoned, not executed, not released, trapped in political limbo, because Elizabeth understood exactly how dangerous it would be to kill another queen. But eventually, the threats became impossible to ignore. In 1586, investigators uncovered the Babington Plot, a conspiracy designed to murder Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne. This time there was evidence, letters, plans, names, and finally, Elizabeth made her decision. Mary, Queen of Scots, would die. On February 8, 1587, Mary was executed, a queen killing a queen, one of the most shocking political executions in European history. And when Elizabeth heard the news, she wept. Some believed the tears were genuine. Others believed they were political theatre. With Elizabeth Tudor, it was often impossible to know the difference, because even after decades on the throne, Elizabeth remained what she had always been: careful, unreadable, and dangerous in ways her enemies never fully understood. The year was 1588, and England was preparing for war. For years, King Philip II of Spain had watched Elizabeth with growing anger. He watched England move further away from the Catholic Church. He watched English privateers attack Spanish treasure ships across the Atlantic. He watched Elizabeth support Protestant rebels against Spanish power. And eventually, he decided the English Queen had become too dangerous to ignore. So Spain prepared an invasion. In the summer of 1588, the Spanish Armada appeared on the horizon. 130 massive ships, thousands of soldiers, the largest naval force Europe had ever seen. Its mission was terrifyingly simple: invade England, remove Elizabeth from the throne, destroy Protestant rule forever, and if necessary, kill the Queen. Fear spread across England. Rumours filled the streets of London. People whispered about invasion, massacres, and the collapse of the kingdom itself. But Elizabeth refused to appear afraid. Instead, she rode out to meet her army at Tilbury, wearing silver armour over a white dress, a queen preparing for war. And there, before thousands of nervous soldiers, Elizabeth delivered one of the most famous speeches in English history. She admitted she had the body of a weak and feeble woman, but she also told them she possessed the heart and stomach of a king, and not just any king, a king of England. The soldiers erupted with cheers, but by then the battle was already turning in England's favour. English fireships tore through the Spanish formation. Cannons exploded across the Channel. Storms scattered the Armada into the freezing waters around Scotland and Ireland. Ship after ship vanished into the sea. Thousands drowned. And the mighty Spanish invasion collapsed before it ever reached English soil. Elizabeth had survived once again, not as a prisoner, not as a suspect, but as the victorious Queen of England. For many people, it was the defining moment of her reign. The impossible daughter of Anne Boleyn had become the symbol of England itself. But victories never last forever. And as the years passed, Elizabeth began losing the people she trusted most. Her longtime advisor, William Cecil, died in 1598 after serving her faithfully for decades. The loss devastated her because Cecil had been more than a politician. He had been stability, one of the few men Elizabeth fully trusted. Without him, the court slowly became colder, more dangerous, more uncertain. And then there was Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, young, charismatic, reckless, one of Elizabeth's final favourites. He was everything Elizabeth was not: impulsive where she was cautious, emotional where she was controlled, dangerous in ways she desperately wanted to ignore. Elizabeth gave him power anyway. She made him a general, sent him to Ireland to crush a rebellion. Instead, Essex failed disastrously. He abandoned his mission, ignored royal orders, and returned to London in humiliation. Still, Elizabeth forgave him, again and again, until she no longer could. In February of 1601, Essex made a catastrophic decision. He launched an armed uprising through the streets of London, a desperate attempt to seize power. But the rebellion collapsed within hours. The people did not support him. The city did not rise for him. And soon, Essex found himself arrested for treason. Now Elizabeth faced a terrible choice. The man she once trusted had become a threat to the crown. Eventually, she signed his death warrant. Some witnesses later claimed she hesitated before signing, that she walked away, then returned, as if part of her still refused to accept what had become necessary. But in the end, Robert Devereux was executed, and after his death, something changed inside Elizabeth. The Queen, who had survived everything, suddenly seemed exhausted. She grew quieter, more withdrawn. She wandered her palaces late at night, sometimes carrying a sword beside her, sometimes sitting silently for hours, watching, thinking, remembering. By then, Elizabeth was an old woman, 67 years old. She had ruled England for more than 4 decades, and nearly everyone from her youth was gone. The final years of her reign carried a strange atmosphere, an almost haunting sadness, because everyone knew the end was approaching. But Elizabeth refused to discuss succession, refused to name an heir, perhaps because she understood better than anyone how dangerous heirs could become. She had once been the uncertain successor herself. She remembered what that felt like, but time was running out. During the winter of 1602, Elizabeth became seriously ill. Her health declined rapidly. Still, she refused to lie down in bed, as if resting meant surrender. Her advisers begged her to name the next ruler of England. Finally, weak and barely audible, Elizabeth gave her answer: James of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, the child of the woman Elizabeth herself had ordered executed. History closing in on itself once again. On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth died at Richmond Palace. She was 69 years old. And with her death, an entire era ended. But Elizabeth left behind far more than a crown. She left behind a New England, an England shaped by Protestant rule, naval power, exploration, literature, and political theatre unlike anything Europe had seen before. Because Elizabeth understood something few rulers ever truly understand. Power is not only controlled through armies. Sometimes, power is controlled through image, through myth, through performance. Elizabeth transformed herself into something larger than human. The Virgin Queen, Gloriana, the living symbol of England. And for decades, the performance never broke. Not in public, not before enemies, not even before her closest advisors. But near the end of her life, one final portrait revealed something different. Not the myth, not the Queen, just an old woman, tired, sharp-eyed, worn down by survival itself. Behind the jewels and royal clothing, you could finally see Elizabeth, the child nobody wanted, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, the prisoner who survived the tower, the queen who trusted almost nobody, the woman who spent her entire life hiding fear behind discipline. For decades, Elizabeth performed strength because weakness could have killed her. And perhaps that was the greatest secret of all. Not that Elizabeth Tudor was fearless, but that she was terrified, and survived anyway, against every prediction, against every enemy, against the brutal world that tried repeatedly to destroy her. She survived, and England survived with her. But survival always comes at a price, and by the end of her life, Elizabeth had paid every part of it.